Future Warrior, Dawn of the Deimos. Chapter 7. Stalker hit the deck at a run as he exited the transport. Link helped Doc get the company's wounded to medical. I'm going up the bridge to see what the hell's going on. Roger that, boss. Stalker sprinted through the corridors, feeling too big for the narrow passages in his bulky EEA. Surprisingly, he passed no one as he made a beeline for the bridge, the ship feeling deserted. Stalker guessed that the crew must have been at their combat stations. After a few impatient moments waiting in one of the lifts, he emerged on the command level and brushed past a platoon of Marines at the entrance of the bridge without even a pause. As the doors opened, he was met by a world of noise and barely ordered chaos. All the bridge officers were wearing their 3 DSI helmets, and around them other bridge staff were manning consoles and furiously following rushed orders. Stalker's questions died on his lips as it quickly dawned on him that everyone was far too busy. His questions would have to wait. Major, have the first fighter wing tighten their perimeter. Too much is getting through. Navigation, keep us as close as possible to the Viking. She needs more cover fire. Tactical, what is the condition of the roads? She's dead, the water captain. The Messiah is moving in to try to pick up what escape pods there might be. Communications, tell Captain Kellerman we can give him 5 minutes, but no longer. We have orders to withdraw once the Osprey is clear. Message acknowledged, ma'am. Captain Magazine F is dry. Switching to G, we have also lost another of our starboard pulse cannons. God damn it. Major, where is my fighter protection? Captain, I am showing both wings at around 50%, and they have expended all of their long-range ordnance. I can't protect the ship with what I have without recalling second wing from covering the Viking or ordering first wing aboard to rearm. Captain Jansen paused for a moment, looking through the bulkhead at the storm of fire around her battered vessel, weighing up her options. Major, recall all fighters, Captain? I said recall all fighters, Major. We have done all we can here. This fight is over. Stalker watched impassively from the sidelines, feeling detached from events as the Artemis slowly began to fall back, the smaller warships around her following suit. The remaining dark stars formed around the ships, and in surprisingly orderly fashion landed aboard the landing bays located either side of amidships. None of the enemy fighters dared approach the big ships, clearly wary of the close-in defenses which were furiously destroying the missiles that continued to pour in from the larger enemy warships. After several minutes, they had cleared the combat zone and began to pick up speed, opening the gap between them and the alien vessels. The enemy didn't pursue, apparently happy to reorganize their forces, the debris-filled space between the two forces falling silent. Damage control, I want a full report. Tactical, keep a close eye on those bastards. They might try to cut off our escape vector. Stalker saw through the bridge's view screens that there were several other ships formed up around the Artemis, including 2 other cruisers. All looked like they had sustained varying degrees of damage. Weapons, what's the status on my reloads? I need those magazines replenished as soon as possible. A and B, report ready. The others are in progress, Captain. Very good, keep me advised. Nice of you to join us, Commander. Stalker took a moment to realize he was being talked to as Captain Jansen continued to look at the bulkhead with her 3 DSI helmet seemingly oblivious to him. Thank you, ma'am. It is a pleasure to be aboard. I'm sure it is, Commander. You were lucky. One of our dark stars picked up your signal and relayed it to us through the interference. Excuse me, Captain. All ships report ready for faster-than-light speed. Captain Jansen turned to her first officer. Very well. Get us out of here. Stalker braced slightly as warning tones sounded around the ship to signal the jump to high-speed travel. A few moments later, there was a slight jolt as the ship engaged its high-speed engines. Ma'am, my men are standing by. Can we assist your damage control parties? Captain Jansen wearily slipped off her 3 DSI helmet and ran a hand through her straight hair. That would be appreciated, Commander. Major, you may leave the bridge and see after your Marines. Please direct the commander where to place his people. Stalker gave Captain Jansen a salute, which she briskly returned before turning away. Without another word, Stalker followed Major Marcelino off the bridge. As soon as the doors closed and they passed out of earshot of the Marine Guard, Stalker turned to Marcelino. What the hell happened, Major? One minute I'm evacuating some civvies, the next moment I've got a down transport and Deimos on my doorstep with no warning. Marcelino stopped and turned, a quizzical look on his face. What did you call them? Stalker realized what he had said and was glad that his helmet hit his face. It's just a name I heard someone call them. Marcelino looked dubiously at Stalker, seeming to search for the truth behind the skull-helmeted man in front of him. Marcelino sighed and shook his head doubtfully before starting to walk again. What happened, Commander, was that they jumped right into us. We never saw them coming, and it doesn't look like they knew we were here either. They jumped out so close that several ships collided. I saw the Africa cut one of their destroyer-sized ships in half when it appeared right in front of her. The Osprey took some damage before she could deploy her fighters, and then it was on for young and old. I've never seen such a mess. Then they jammed our communications. Stalker suppressed his frustration. War was unpredictable and recriminations helped no one. Understood. What's our next move? We're jumping to Ross 154, and we'll reform there around the core planet, which has some old orbital defense platforms still in place. We should be there in a few hours, and no doubt those bastards won't be far behind us. Your division's transports have been ordered back closer to Earth, probably to Proxima Centauri, to meet up with elements of the 6th Fleet. The 6th is falling back from the Cygni systems. You are stuck with us. We will engage the enemy at Ross 154 to buy them time to set up a defense. They both emerged into the hangar, and Stalker was glad to see that his wounded had been taken to the medical bay. The rest of his men now busily engaged in raiding the ship's main armory for whatever they could find. Stalker and Marcelino elected to send Link aft to engineering with roughly a third of the men, while the rest will be divided up between Marcelino on the command level and Stalker on the main weapons and flight deck situated amidships. Stalker watched his men working with the Marines, both working with the smooth efficiency he demanded. He had always liked Marines. They had no time for bullshit, and neither did he. The time passed too quickly for Stalker. He knew he was planning for a space engagement, and there were many preparations and repairs to do before he would be near satisfied. He knew he pushed his men hard, sometimes too hard perhaps, but these were his men, and he demanded they mirror his drive and commitment, a requirement in which they had never failed him. The Terra Nova men were now assisting the Marines, preparing the remaining Dark Stars for combat. Stalker also ordered a few of them to prepare makeshift defenses at strategic corridor intersections. That order had raised a few eyebrows, but it kept the men busy, and Stalker knew that a lack of preparedness and outside-the-box anticipation could be a basic mistake that could trip up even experienced soldiers. As the time of the arrival at Ross 154 approached, Stalker, Link, and Marcelino assembled on the bridge. The ship had been rearmed, and all possible preparations and repairs had been made during the jump. Stalker felt his stomach sink and churn as the ship's jump engines cut out, and with a bright flash and a jolt, the panorama of the Ross system was revealed. In the distance was the red dwarf star of Ross 154, a small dim star which was relatively young at only around 1 billion years old. Much closer was the once icy planet of Ross Optima, now converted through environmental engineering into a green forested planet over 2/3 covered by oceans, made crimson-purple by blooms of introduced oxygen, producing genetically engineered bacteria. Around the planet was a collection of old space stations and platforms, and it was close to them that Stalker saw the massive bulk of the Osprey. The Osprey was surrounded by swirling flights of prowling fighters, and assembling in a cordon further out was the rest of the fleet, and yet more roving flights of fighters. The whole ordered scene seemed to belie the chaos that had occurred only hours before. Captain Jansen noticed in a glance the defensive formation chosen by the fleet admiral, and nodded to her communications officer's unspoken request to contact Fleet Command. Fleet Command, this is the Artemis. We are on station and requesting entrance into the grid. Roger, Artemis. It's good to see you. Move to Grid Zone 16 and take up geosynchronous orbit. All receive command. It's good to be here. Artemis out. From the bridge of the UES Africa, Admiral Sergei Lev surveyed his fleet. He had placed the Osprey closer to the planet where the orbital defenses could provide extra cover, and she was surrounded by hundreds of prowling fighters. The rest of the heavy ships were grouped around his flagship, forming a tight perimeter. He cursed silently under his breath. Fleet, he thought derisively, had only a dozen major warships remaining in his fleet. The Third Fleet, like all the others, had been stripped to reinforce Earth. His fleet had originally been 24 strong all told. He had sent 7 ships to reinforce Earth, lost the Cerberus at Delta Pavonis, and had just lost 2 destroyers in the short, sharp engagement at Alteris. He had also dispatched the fleet's lightly armed supply and transport ships, including the 12 Terra Nova transports, back closer to Earth to keep them safe. They were of no value in a major space engagement. That left him with a total strength of 12 warships remaining, 1 assault carrier, 2 capital ships, 3 cruisers, and a mix of 6 smaller destroyers and frigates. He watched quietly as the status reports from his fleet scrolled up on one of the big display screens on the spacious bridge. Most of the ships had rearmed their magazines and were reporting ready for action, but all had suffered damage, and he knew that even now damage control teams were desperately shoring up hull breaches and trying to force their way into cut-off sections to locate trapped survivors. Lev looked around at the scurrying people on the bridge impassively. The Africa's captain was talking calmly on a comm link to the animated leader of a damage control team from the bow, which was trying to patch up damage from a collision with an enemy ship at Alteris. The bridge officers were hurriedly communicating with their sections and double-checking vital systems. The whole place seemed a hive of activity. Only the admiral seemed to have little to do on the bustling bridge. He had already given his orders and could do nothing but wait while they were carried out, or the enemy arrived and required his attentions. Sandra Jansen was just beginning to feel relaxed. Over an hour and a half had passed since she had arrived at Ross 154. All major systems were online, and some of the damaged weapon systems had been restored by repair teams. She looked at a display on her command console, which showed the status of the ship's defenses. The last red indicator had just turned green, indicating that the last missile magazine had now been replenished. She broke into a rare, thin smile before quickly hiding it and resuming her stony expression. Her crew had performed better than even she had expected. Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted by the voice of her communications officer. "Captain, we have incoming. Scout drones from the Africa have picked up enemy ships approaching on the edge of the system. How many contacts?" "Around 30, Captain. We don't have an exact count as yet. Long-range sensors are being jammed with very effective interference. Very well, sound general quarters and clear for action." Stalker heard the alarm sound and knew, without being told, that the enemy had caught up with them. Stalker tensed in anticipation. Here we go, he thought. Much the same thought passed through the mind of Admiral Lev as the information from the scout drones had come in, his excitement rising. Both forces now knew exactly where the other side was, and there would be no more surprise encounters. This would be the type of large-scale fleet action that he had trained for his entire life, and despite the danger, he relished the opportunity. He glanced calmly around. The bridge had fallen quiet, and faces were on him. They were waiting for his orders. His eyes met the tactical officer who anticipated his question. "All ships report ready for action, Admiral." "Excellent. Activate Nexus, verify connection, and switch to automatic." "Yes, Admiral." Lev watched in silence as the Nexus display lit up. Nexus was the latest in a long line of automated defensive control systems and the most advanced yet devised. It connected all the ships in the fleet by a secure data link, coordinating their long and short-range defensive weapon systems in a tight grid. The advanced computers automatically slaved missiles and cannons from the fleet on incoming missiles, fighters and ships faster than any human operator possibly could. The system identified and designated targets in order of threat and priority, ensuring that even against massed or multiple point attacks, the fleet could coordinate its defensive fire to maximum effect. The system also linked in with the IFF signals emitted by friendly fighters and ships, and calculated weapons fire trajectory so they wouldn't be endangered by friendly fire. This meant that fighters and warships could maneuver freely without fear of blue-on-blue incidents. Admiral Lev was happy to have a system like Nexus at his disposal. It took the worry of defense out of his hands, leaving him free to concentrate on offense. Admiral Lev watched as the enemy fleet arrived in the distance, the darkness of space being lit up by rippling flashes. Enemy fleet now confirmed at 33, Admiral. Very good. Tell all commands to hold their stations and make sure those fighters are on short leash. I don't want them wandering. The tactical staff officer, Tso, acknowledged, and his junior officers began to relay the orders to the fleet. The admiral wanted the enemy to come to him. Lev was amongst the last of a dying breed. He was a naval officer that had come through the ranks and earned a battlefield commission. He had served on small ships, but distinguished himself later as a cruiser captain. Unlike many of the other fleet admirals, he preferred to have his flag on a capital ship rather than on the fleet's assault carrier, preferring the more spacious and traditional bridge of the battleship Africa to the high-tech combat information center of the Bird of Prey-class assault carriers. Lev was quite happy to leave the control of the Osprey and her fighters to the competent management of his second-in-command, Rear Admiral Yoshiro Matsuda. Lev had always preferred the raw firepower of the battleships and battlecruisers. The Africa would also be at the front of the battle where her firepower could be best employed, protected by her vast array of electronic and active defenses. Lev knew, though, that her true worth was not just in firepower, but in the sheer strength of her armor and construction. The Africa, along with the battleship Inflexible, would be rocks around which the attacking enemy fleet would break. The armor and construction of capital ships was designed to be strong enough to allow them to take terrible punishment, even pushing through asteroid belts if necessary, and not just survive, but be able to fight at the end of it. The Africa would be in the thick of any battle, just where Admiral Sergei Lev believed a fighting fleet admiral belonged. Lev also preferred not to don the 3 DSI helmets worn by the Africa's captain and most of the bridge and staff officers, finding that they gave him a headache. Instead, he looked at the Africa's large plot screen with its vast amounts of data and several associated holo displays. Already the enemy fleet's location and formation were displayed on the plot screen, giving a clear visual indication of their disposition and known data for each ship, in this case limited to size, speed, and course. A holo display also showed a projection of the system, with the planet and both fleets' locations in real time. As Lev watched, the enemy began to move forward, holding a diamond-shaped formation, with 5 large ships on each point and a 6th immense vessel in the center of the formation. Inside the formation were the smaller ships and billowing numbers of nimble fighters, appearing on another holo display which showed the enemy fleet in higher detail as a growing swarm. Admiral, they are approaching maximum weapons range. A slight smile came across the Admiral's face, a hawkish expression that showed his teeth. Ready rail cannons. At several locations around the massive ship's exterior, large ports opened. These revealed the firing points of the Africa's heaviest weapons. The immense rail cannons were the main reason for the capital ship's huge dimensions, the size being needed to house the enormous engines and generators needed, as well as the huge weapons themselves. Even with her massive reserves of power, the Africa could only fire 6 of them at a time, while maintaining all other systems. In this case, the 6 weapons mounted in 2 banks of 3 either side of the bow. Inflexible reports ready. Our systems are online and ready to fire, your command, Admiral. Very well. Let's give them something to think about. Target the lead enemy ship and fire when ready. Moments later, there was an immense flash that lit up the space around the Africa as she fired. 6 massive blue bolts of energy lancing out towards the still distant enemy, followed less than a second later by 4 similar bolts from the Inflexible. The shots arrived at the lead enemy vessel even before they registered on the ship's warning systems. The first 6 shots were weakened by the ship's energy shields before punching through and impacting on the armored hull, causing little critical damage. Half a second later, the 4 shots from the Inflexible arrived and passed through the drained energy shields virtually unhindered and tore into the vessel. The immensely powerful shots punched through the armored hull, buckling in the process, before penetrating some 2 kilometers inside the 10-kilometer-long Leviathan. The damage was cataclysmic. The already buckled hull was racked by the effects of explosive decompression, vast chunks of a ship tearing off and going whirling off into space. The vacuum of space reached deep into the ship through the holes punched by the impact of the rail cannon fire, and debris was dragged out like giant streams of blood from a giant, wounded metallic animal. The distance was too great for Admiral Lev to see for himself the destruction he had wrought, but he saw on the hollow display that the lead ship slowed before going spiraling out of formation. "Weapons, how long on my reload?" He already knew the answer, but some habits died hard. 4 minutes, Admiral. Very well, pass on my congratulations to the captain of the Inflexible, and have her target Sierra 4, and we will target Sierra 7. Admiral, aspect change in the enemy fleet. They are beginning to reverse course. They aren't withdrawing, just pulling out of weapons range. Where the hell is my reload? Growled Leviticus. Just over 3 minutes, Admiral. Very well. Fire as soon as possible before they get out of range. The minutes seemed to pass like hours before there was another flash as the Africa fired again, followed a few seconds later by the Inflexible. At the maximum extent of their range, the shots lacked power. Africa's shots hitting a cruiser-sized ship, which successfully shrugged off the impact. The destroyer-sized ship, Sierra 4, targeted by the Inflexible, took heavy but not fatal damage before slipping out of range under her own power. Admiral Lev leaned back slightly and crossed his arms, a picture of concentration. "Weren't expecting that, were you?" "Your move," said Lev softly, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The move didn't take long in coming. Admiral, numerous smaller enemy craft, identify as possible fighters, have broken away from the fleet and are closing. "How many?" Admiral Lev looked impatiently at the back of the TSO's head. "I said, how many, damn it?" The man seemed frozen and snapped out of it at the words. "We can't get an accurate number, but it appears that there are over 8,000. Lev sat forward in his chair. 8,000? Confirm account. Lev's mind raced. He knew that even with the Marine fighters, he had less than 1,500 aircraft to call on, of which only around 1,000 were armed with long-range air-to-air missiles, the rest carrying a mix of short-range air-to-air and anti-ship missiles. "Signal the fleet. All air superiority fighters to push forward now and intercept the enemy. Tell them to launch all their long-range missiles, then to withdraw back to the fleet, turn and burn. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." In only moments, just under 1,000 F-55 Dark Stars, already formed up into squadrons around the fleet, went to full power and sped away towards the mass of incoming enemy aircraft. They pushed their machines to the limit as they streaked away from the fleet, keen to engage the enemy, and knowing that if they didn't thin them out, that they might not have a fleet to return to. Sitting on the Africa's bridge, Admiral Lev had the pilot's comm traffic patch through to the bridge, listening as the fighters closed in on the enemy. "Epsilon leader to all wings. We are approaching the envelope. Prepare to launch all long-range ordnance, then immediately commence your turn." The seconds passed in silence. Then came the noise of the flight leaders confirming their missile launches. The fighters then turned back towards the fleet on full power. No return fire came from the onrushing enemy aircraft. Instead, they came on with grim determination and icy silence. As the almost 4,000 missiles fired by the Dark Stars closed in on the mass of the enemy, they began to react, a number of them accelerating still faster, pushing ahead of the main force. The now leading enemy fighters filled the surrounding space with powerful jamming, and the number of detected contacts suddenly doubled, to the shock of the Africa's combat staff. "Admiral, they have deployed some type of decoys to mask their approach. Looks like one per aircraft." "I see it. Keep your heads, people. Look to your duty," Lev growled. The heavy missiles barreled onwards, the onboard computers on some opting to switch to visual tracking due to the heavy electronic jamming. On one of the Africa's hollow displays, Admiral Lev watched as the two masses merged into one. The minute flittering lights first joined, then disappeared. "Admiral, I have no idea what the attack achieved. We are still tracking over 12,000 targets inbound. We have no way of telling which are enemy fighters or which are decoys." The mass of targets kept coming, and just outside the range of the fleet's defensive missiles, the true extent of the threat suddenly emerged. Each enemy fighter launched 2 heavy anti-ship weapons which sped away. At the same moment, the remaining decoys, which also doubled as anti-ship missiles once their primary function had been served, folded in the wings, which gave them a larger radar signature and accelerated to attack speed. Vampire. Vampire. Multiple missiles inbound. Confirm the count. Count is confirmed at 18,432 vampires. The shock on the bridge of the Africa was total. No one had ever entertained, let alone trained for such a mass attack. Despite the momentary human paralysis, Nexus's electronic brain methodically went to work. The fleet began to empty its defensive missile magazines. From all ships, a seemingly endless stream of missiles leapt from launch tubes, fed by magazines deep within the vessel's superstructures. Admiral Sergei Lev knew he was almost certainly watching the destruction of his entire command unfold. The display of the retreating enemy showed that around 2,000 enemy fighters had been eliminated before they could launch their attack, but it wouldn't be enough. He ordered every fighter in the fleet to launch their short-range missiles at the incoming swarm of vampires, but he doubted that it would make a difference. Even if every missile from the fighters and the fleet hit one of the enemies, it still would not be enough. The fleet was going to take a lot of hits. His only shred of hope was that enough of the surviving enemy missiles could be caught by close and gun and cannon defenses. The Third Fleet and its fighters poured out a veritable hailstorm of missiles, space being lit by countless flashes as they began reaching their incoming targets. But the enemy missiles droned mindlessly on, seeming to shrug off the mass of fire directed at them. The barrage took an appalling toll on the enemy missiles, and as they arrived at the Third Fleet's warships, yet more were thinned out by the ship's individual point defenses. But as Admiral Lev had feared, it was not enough. Nexus was overwhelmed by sheer numbers, and in one long, horrifying moment, the remaining missiles reached the fleet. Hundreds of missiles made it to the fleet, around 1,500 swarming the Africa alone. The clothes and weapons systems, CIWS, destroyed many more. The rest went crashing into the gray-hulled UEF warships with multiple flashes. Powerful explosions, appearing small against the massive size of the Africa, rippled down her length, appearing to touch every inch of the ship. The battleship's massively thick armor saved her from the worst of the damage, but even the Africa's tough hide was breached in several locations, opening sections of the ship to the vacuum of space. Automated damage control systems detected the loss of pressure and quickly sealed off the worst breached areas, utilizing the ship's compartmentalized design. The exterior of the ship, once smooth, instantly became like the cratered surface of the moon, a growing cloud of debris surrounding the fleet flagship. The smaller ships of the fleet, especially the escort ships, did not fare as well, with all six, 2 frigates and 4 destroyers, shattered from multiple hits and spiraling out of control, effectively dead in space. Hundreds of lives lost in a single devastating instant. Admiral Lev fumbled in the darkness, and touching his face, he felt warm blood running down and dripping off his chin. The darkness was lit by sparks from shorting electronics and pierced by moans and cries. He shook his head and wiped the blood from his eyes. Report. Report if you're alive, damn it. He heard a few replies in the darkness and decided he was indeed still alive. Where the hell is my emergency lighting? As if in response, a small light appeared nearby, partly illuminating the chaotic scene. Admiral Lev watched as the person with the flashlight began to move around the room. He tried to rise, his left leg gave out under him, and he fell cursing loudly. Reaching down, he felt more warm wetness and several large pieces of sharp metal sticking out of his thigh. He cursed again to no one in particular. At that moment, the bridge was suddenly lit by bright red chemical lighting as the backup systems kicked in, revealing the extent of the damage in red monotones. The bridge was shattered. All the view screens had disintegrated, and shrapnel had swept across its length, cutting down many of the ship's officers and the admiral's staff. The admiral found himself on the ground in a pile of debris several feet from his command chair, the last place he had remembered being before the missile salvo had hit. A tattered-looking junior officer approached with a horrified look on his face and called for a medic. "Forget the damn medic. Get me to my chair, boy." "But sir, you're bleeding." "I don't give a fuck. Give me a hand here, and that's an order." Lev snapped, his ample temper boiling over. With his free hand, he dragged some metal fragments off his chair, and with the help of the junior officer, lowered himself into it. Propped up in a chair, he looked around. He saw at once that several of the bridge crew were certainly dead, including the ship's captain who had been decapitated by a flying object, his headless body lying near his command console. On the bridge of the Artemis, there was ordered chaos. Captain Sandra Jansen had managed to stay standing at her console, and the bridge had survived relatively intact. Even more amazingly, the 3DSI system was still operational, and as her officers and crew rushed to restore full control of the ship, she looked around at the surrounding destruction. The larger ships were mostly intact, although all were surrounded by debris fields. She saw the Africa and Inflexible off to her right. Both were holding their positions. In the distance, the Osprey was venting gas from numerous hits, but amazingly several of the defense platforms around her seemed relatively intact. As she watched the Osprey, momentarily fascinated by the clouds of spewing gas, something caught her eye, a massive chunk of unrecognizable, swirling wreckage. My God, is that the Messiah? She thought. She watched the twisted mess, no longer resembling the sleek destroyer it had once been. Now just a pile of twisted junk spiraling out of control and slowly heading into space. She was snapped out of her thoughts as an officer informed her that the ship's tactical computer systems and long-range sensors were back online. She was about to ask about the location of the enemy when an impossibly close and bright series of flashes rippled through space, and like wraiths, dozens of enemy ships appeared amongst the shattered Third Fleet. The larger ones instantly pouring forth fighters with cold precision. The debris-filled space suddenly came alive with cannon, scatter laser, and missile fire as the Third Fleet's prowling fighters pounced on the enemy ships and the fighters that were issuing from them. Amazingly, the fighters were joined by heavy fire from the UEF warships as every remaining gun, missile, and weapon system was brought to bear. Captain Jansen gave the order to open fire and watched as heavy anti-ship missiles and pulse cannon fire stretched out towards the enemy from the Artemis's few still operational launchers. Captain Jansen could only marvel at the enemy ships. They were almost impossibly ugly and seemed to radiate something that she couldn't put her finger on, something decidedly unhuman and inescapably repugnant. The battle was utterly furious in its intensity. From the Africa, and Inflexible issued deadly blasts from their surviving rail cannons, the powerful shots tearing through enemy ships at nearly point-blank range in a battle that resembled the warfare of ancient Earth's cannon-armed sailing ships rather than that of high-tech behemoths deep in space. With most of their close and defenses damaged or destroyed, the surviving UEF warships were taking terrible punishment as they fought on. But the result was inevitable as slowly but surely they were being battered in submission and their escorting fighters annihilated in a whirlwind of fire. Captain Jansen saw amongst the chaos that the enemy had deployed a new weapon. Large tubular missiles smashed into several ships, including hers. But surprisingly, they didn't detonate, instead remaining sticking out from the sides of the ships like arrows in a wounded animal. It took a moment before it dawned on her. Those aren't missiles. She hit a button on her command panel, activating the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We have been boarded by the enemy. We are taken. All hands prepare to repel boarders. Stalker was busy helping a Marine medic patch up a Navy crewman who had a broken arm and severe lacerations. The man was one of a number who had been injured or killed when a nearby compartment had rapidly vented into space following a missile hit, sending men and debris hurtling down a passageway before a blast door sealed the leak. Stalker knew the ship was taking heavy damage and could hear the fire of nearby pulse cannons and feel the dull tremor of impacts on the hull, but was as surprised as anyone when he heard Captain Jansen's voice announce that they had been boarded. Stalker left the medic and jogged down a corridor that led between two of the weapon stations. As he passed an adjoining passageway, he sensed movement out of the corner of his eye and heard a low scuffling sound in his ears picked up by the EEA's sensors. Turning mid-stride, Stalker saw a green blur of energy fire pass. So close to his head, he swore he could feel the heat of its passing through his suit's helmet. Coming up the narrow passage was a solid wall of tall, lanky aliens. He recognized them instantly. The leading Deimos roared a guttural challenge, and Stalker brought his rifle up and squeezed the trigger. In the narrow passage, the effect was nothing short of spectacular. In full auto fire, the ASBR emptied its 45-round magazine just seconds. The heavy impulse rounds smashed into the crush of enemy. Chunks of flesh and armor flew, coating the walls, the Deimos seeming to melt before the hailstorm of fire. Stalker dropped to his knee, green energy bursts filling the air around him, one impacting on his shoulder guard, throwing his aim wide just as his ASBR ran dry, sending the last few rounds into the wall in a shower of metallic fragments. Contact. Enemy infiltrators in Section 26C. Stalker dropped the empty mag from his ASBR, and in the same movement worked the underslung M503, and despite the point-blank range, fired. Stalker was rocked back by the force of the explosion as the grenade went off with a crump, shattering the gore-filled passageway. Stalker tried desperately to get a fresh mag at his rifle, but the explosion had pushed him back into a sitting position. As he fumbled to slam it home, a stray energy round came through the smoke-filled passageway and struck him in the center of the chest. The impact sent him falling back awkwardly, forcing him to drop the new magazine in his hand as he reached out to balance himself. The magazine sent skittering across the passage floor. Stalker swore and was desperately reaching for another when the first Deimos crashed through the smoke, seeming impossibly large to Stalker from his position on the floor. It carried a short, stubby-looking weapon in one hand, and in the other held a wicked-looking twin-bladed knife. Time seemed to slow, and Stalker knew he was dead as the alien attacked with blinding speed, roaring as it came. Stalker brought his rifle up and caught the twin-bladed weapon as it came down toward his face. The two met, and the strength of the impact was bone-jarring. In fury, the Deimos swung its energy weapon to bear. Just as it came in line with Stalker's face, the arm holding it came apart at the joint in a splash of yellow-gray colored blood. The weapon, with arms still attached, fell harmlessly to the ground, and more rounds struck the creature, which fell to the ground in a crumpled heap. Stalker felt hands grab him, and he was unceremoniously dragged backwards, Terra Nova and Marines filling the gap and opening fire down the passageway. One of the Marines began to check him over, but Stalker saw from his HUD indicators that his suit had held, although a number of system warnings were flashing. "I'm all right. Give me a hand up." The Marine heaved Stalker to his feet, and at once Stalker began to detect the noise of combat further away, the sound of firing seeming to come from every point of the compass. Reports began to flow in from other units around the ship. The Deimos seemed to be everywhere, and despite the best efforts of the Marines and Terra Nova, they were rapidly being pushed back. Stalker knew he had to keep control of all three of the vital areas on the ship: engineering, command level, and the primary weapons deck. If he lost just one of these critical areas, the game was over. Deep in the bowels of the Artemis, a four-man Marine patrol were moving forward cautiously down a gloomy passageway. They had been isolated when the ship had taken missile damage, and emergency blast doors had sealed them off as they had moved between engineering sections. They decided to move down to a lower level and cross over before making their way back up via another route. Their path took them directly under one of the ship's main reactor interface units deep within the bowels of the ship. The lead Marine tried to contact his platoon leader, but got nothing but static. He cursed as he realized that they must still be too close to the magnetic field produced by the reactor. He felt nervous, but he wasn't sure why. It was just a few hundred meters of deserted, dimly lit service passage, but his every sense seemed to be screaming danger. With an effort, he crushed his rising tension and moved forward. The passage seemed to go on forever, and the small, dim lights threw weird shadows. He chuckled to himself. He was being foolish. Surely his only danger was that he might fall down some unseen hole. He paused and raised his hand to stop the others following behind. He strained to listen. Was that gunfire? He thought. He decided it was impossible, and that it must have been the ship creaking. He shook his head in exasperation at his own foolishness. There was a battle going on against aliens in space, and here he was jumping at shadows. "Let's go." As he walked blithely forward, he considered getting his night vision attachment out of his kit, but he was under orders to save its power cell, and there was no danger to justify using it. He froze mid-thought, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. He peered into the gloam, certain he had seen movement. He raised his rifle and waved the next man forward, his silhouette materializing at his side. He spoke in a whisper. "You got NV in your kit, right?" The man just nodded. "Flick it on for a moment. I swear I saw movement up ahead." If the soldier thought the request was foolish, he made no comment. Instead, he reached down to his side and grabbed a small device and placed it on his shoulder with a click that seemed awfully loud in the silent passageway. He then connected a small cord into his Marine-issue SBA. Taking a moment to screw the thread tight that held the plug in, he then flicked a small switch on the device and looked forward. The man staggered as if hit by some unseen object, jerked his rifle up, and opened fire, the roar of the IW-30C deafening as it echoed down the passage. The darkness ahead lit up with bright green bursts of energy fire. The shock was total. As the lead Marine opened fire at the flashes, he saw the man next to him take a hit to the face and go staggering to the ground with a sicking thud. The air seemed alive with fire. He got off half a magazine before suddenly one of his legs was knocked out from under him, and he fell awkwardly. He landed on something soft and realized it was the other Marine's body. The realization of what was happening hit him, and he felt bile rising in his mouth. He desperately grasped for his rifle, but couldn't find it. His hand touched his leg, but found only a bloody stump where it had been. He felt cold, and the sounds of the firing seemed to growing further away. He glanced around groggily, his eyes focusing on movement close by. He saw a lithe-looking creature crouch and fire a short rifle. He clasped for a grenade and tried to rise to throw it, but was knocked flat by a hit to the chest. As the last flicker of life drained out of his body, the muscles in his hand relaxed, and the grenade rolled to the ground. The explosion tore through the passage, the shockwave propelling superheated shrapnel into the overhead reactor interface. The reactor had been built deep within the hull to keep it safe from possible damage. Its designers, however, had never anticipated a grenade explosion directly below one of the main interfaces, and the results were as catastrophic as they were spectacular. With a thunderous explosion, an entire section of the Artemis blew outwards, sending thousands of tons of steel and debris swirling into space. The explosion destroyed one of the main reactors and many of the associated systems, including the primary stabilizers. With a slow, tumbling motion, the Artemis began to drift, no longer able to hold its position, falling slowly as it was caught in the gravitational pull of Ross Optima. On the bridge, Captain Sandra Jansen grasped her console as the ship began to roll. She took one look at the ship's vital status display and saw what she already knew. The ship was lost. She activated a communications channel to the fleet flagship. "This is Arrow to Lion Lead. The Artemis is a dead stick. We're going down." "Say again, we're going down. Good luck, Lion. Arrow out." Calmly, she removed her 3DSI helmet and let it drop to the ground. "The ship is lost. It has been a privilege to serve with all of you. We have done all we can. It's time to go." The rest of the bridge officers took off their helmets. She saw both bitterness for the loss of the ship and pride in their eyes. No one showed fear. She activated the ship's internal communication system. "This is the captain speaking. All hands abandon ship. I say again, all hands abandon ship. Good luck to you all." With that, she grabbed up her sidearm and led her people off the bridge, the shriek of the evacuation alarm echoing in her wake.